I think that challenge of gathering information is going to get more difficult in the coming years with the decline of newspapers. Not all newspapers are in decline. Many rural newspapers and small regional dailies are still very strong. However, we look at the Minnesota Newspaper Association that represents newspapers. We spend over $100,000 a year lobbying the Minnesota legislature on issues of freedom of information, on data practices, and the open meeting law. We have two people who look through every single bill and every single amendment that's introduced to comb through those bills to see if they would restrict access to data or provide more provisions for closed meetings. We are the only organization that does that on such a comprehensive level. Now imagine newspapers in decline, and imagine a legislature without the Minnesota Newspaper Association there looking over every single bill. How long would it take before little bits and pieces of laws got changed, restricting access to information? So we have a lot of challenges ahead in that way. The same thing works for the courts. As newspapers are in decline and don't have the finances to fight the court battles, things could start to slip by. In the case of the Watergate stories, the chief financial officer of the Washington Post came to Catherine Boehm and said, "We are down $7 million since you started running these stories." Her reply was, "It's a good thing we can afford it." Who would say that today?
I'm Ann Frisch. I used to be a member of the Wisconsin Freedom of Information Council, and I'm new in Minnesota. And I'm quite concerned about this proposal to charge $1,000 deposit to file an appeal on a public record with a rebate if you win your case. As an activist for 15 years, that would have ended my activism, because I got so many denials of public record. I went to court with a pro bono lawyer, but I didn't have $1,000 to make a deposit to file an appeal.
That bill is going up for a hearing this week in the Senate Judiciary Committee. And that is Senator Betzel's bill, and there will be an opportunity for you to talk about that. And there's been some discussion about that because citizens find it very hard to afford that $1,000. And there are other things about that bill. But there are some people here who can help you on that. But I just want to make a comment.
The money that is?
Are you offering money?
No, I'm trying some language to maybe get that down, or inform a papyrus like they do at the courts or something like that. But I'm just saying that there's some discussion on that. Second, just a comment. I heard from Mr. Amundsen about how the newspapers are doing lots of things and all that. And I will agree with you, Mr. Amundsen. The newspapers have been in the forefront of many things. But one of the things, because of dynamics, of cost, of money, things like that, I remember the days of when Mr. Finnegan would write up a big editorial 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times during the legislative session. Bob Shaw, a number of other people, 3, 4 folks, newspapers that do things. Now it's basically Mark and Sandy. But a lot of things are happening to where they have to make their priorities major things, but the minor things are being passed through. I pick up on a lot of those. And sometimes I'm the only one fighting. I try to get other people involved or other groups involved. So knowing the process and all this, how can we expand a broader coalition to where this person who just mentioned, she's from Wisconsin, new to Minnesota, people like me, people like you, and I see some political people here and all that, how to make a broader coalition to try and get something happening, and also not to lose the openness that we now have.
First of all, that bill that's in the state legislature is backed by the Minnesota Newspaper Association. There's several things. It takes months and months to get a freedom of information, access to information case through the courts. It can take years to get those through the courts sometimes. The cost can be thousands and thousands of dollars after you pay your filing fee, which I think is over around $345 or something like that. You have to have initial filing fee in court, and then you've got your attorney's fees, you've got the ongoing costs of fighting this for months and months and months. We want to streamline the process, where you've got the $1,000 filing fee, you get the whole thing back except for $50. if you are found to win that case. So you get the whole feedback except for $50. The other thing is, we're estimating that somewhere in 30 to 45 days, that case will be settled, not months or years. And that's one of the reasons we're pushing for that law within the state of Minnesota, to streamline the process and to get it a lot faster. And I do believe that, Minnesota Newspaper Association has played a leadership role in Data Practices Act and the Open Meeting Law, but there are many other organizations focused in certain areas that also help us in a lot of ways. And I think we do have to reach a way of reaching out. The Minnesota Newspaper Association Legislative Committee probably does most of the work for the M&A as far as formulating the bills that we're going to really watch. And we could bring in some other people representing some different interests into that committee, I think.
And our organization would like to serve some role in that. Don may be about to mention that as well.
Actually, I'm going somewhere else.
Okay.
Don Gemberling. I have been thinking a lot about the current attitude of anger about most everything, especially government. And part of where I've gone with that is, Chief Justice Magison's remarks really helped me when he was talking about the canvassing board and how the openness really contributed to people trusting what happened. And of course, the big issue right now is distrust. And part of what I'm seeing in the legislature, and I can't remember how many sessions I've been to. It's getting close to 40, and I shouldn't think about that. But more and more what I'm seeing in the legislature is an attitude that excludes openness, okay? And I understand how this happens in the process because of the crush of business, but more and more I see you interest groups go behind closed doors, cut a deal, and we, the legislature, will accept the deal. And last week I had an experience where basically a legislator said, well, this public testimony we're hearing, the interest groups have made all these decisions, so just ignore it, okay? Now, if you sense a little passion on my part, I was the person who gave the testimony, okay? And I gave it not as an individual, but on behalf of the Minnesota Coalition on Government Information. And, we have a lot of closed-door legislative stuff, budget stuff, policy stuff, and I think legislators ought to think about whether or not that contributes to the fact we have thousands of people who are now willing to go into the streets and scream bloody murder. The government is either a fascist or a communist conspiracy. And it all goes back to what the Chief Justice said about openness, inspiring confidence in the process. Thank you.
My name's Alquist, and I am with the Twin Cities Daily Planet, which was a 2007 recipient of the Finnegan Award. Well, I was on the board of directors, so great. I like to feel like I had a small.
And your life has been improved since then.
My life has been improved, and just recently we won a victory. One of our writers, Sheila Regan, got court documents opened that were sealed in a case in Iowa where 2 animal rights activists had been pulled in front of a grand jury and they refused, and she was able to get those court documents opened.
Yes, Andy Driscoll, KFAI, and Civic Media Minnesota. 2 things. First, I'm really concerned that the Newspaper Association, Reed, is backing a bill that would make it more difficult for the average citizen to get hold of that information. And I would think that you'd want to find some way, along with Minkoji and others, to make certain that that kind of sort of bond posting in order to get that information would be waived in the case of individuals like Rich or me or Ann or whoever in order to get that information. And I don't know if that's possible, but it seems to me that's a legislative, ought to be a legislative requirement as well. There's got to be some way where the $1,000 can be waived up front in order for individuals to file a Freedom of Information order. Number 2, Civic Media Minnesota is trying to bring civic literacy and media literacy back to the schools. We're setting up an education system right now, or a curriculum, that would supplement and complement the high schools and junior college and middle school curriculum in civics. so that an understanding of local government, urging to get involved in problem solving at the local level, and to actually influence public policy will be part of that, to see where the intersection of media and freedom of information all come together. And I would urge all of you to help us do that. Thank you.
I would, I don't think the Minnesota Newspaper Association has any problem with reducing that $1,000 cost. Yeah, not at all. One of the fine things we find today is people aren't filing those suits because the costs are prohibitive. They can't do it, it's just too expensive. And so one of the reasons we are backing this bill, or have been, is to get, so that people can make these challenges. And $1,000 is affordable for the most part to a lot more people than 10,000 or.
Why is it so expensive, Lee? What is it, where are the costs?
Let's have,
I think Senator Poggemiller could probably jump in here. Anything that goes to the legislature right now that has a money figure on it ain't gonna go anywhere, okay? Because there ain't any money. So the $1,000 basically is based on an estimate from the State Office of Administrative Hearings as to their best guess as to how much it would cost to process one of these cases, because they're a fee-for-service agency. Now, a little factor. If you win the case, the government if you win the case, the government's got to pay the attorney's fees and you get your money back, except for $50, which constitutes a filing fee. But again, part of what I'm seeing at the legislature, which really bothers me, the House committee had a vote on whether or not the $50 fee should go back to the citizen if they win the whole garbanzo. And they had a party line vote on it. For $50. And much to my horror, for some of you who know where I come from, the Democrats all voted for the $50.
Which were the parties, Don?
The Republicans all voted against the $50. In other words, the Republicans said, give the citizen their money back, and the Democrats said no. Now again, some of you know where I come from, and can imagine, I sat there going, you gotta be kidding me, am I in one of Tim Burton's movies? So, anyway, in theory, the citizen gets their money back, but they gotta win. There are some other problems with the bill from a citizen perspective, but we can talk about that.
Yeah, and so that's the start of another dialogue that I hope will continue beyond Freedom of Information Day, beyond Sunshine Week, and into the coming year. We welcome your participation. Thank you very much for coming.
I think more and more media organizations are finding, if you're charged $1,000 each time you want that piece of information, eventually even larger media organizations can't afford to get that.
Right, let's say you
Now
need 30
smaller
minutes,
individuals,
we're gonna choose.
precisely, you're going to make some tough decisions that way. And I think individuals otherwise are going to say, I'm going to find that information elsewhere. And hopefully they can get active with the legislature, suggested by Don, to say, wait a minute, that's too high, we can't afford that.
I asked Tom Linder about this. You've got maybe $1,000, Tom Linder. And he said, not really. I do have limits too.
The way the bill is set up, okay, is if you win, you get $950 back, okay? And the government gets stuck with the fees
But
for,
that gamble inhibits me from maybe trying.
I won't disagree with you, okay? And I think that's part of what the legislature needs to hear from people, okay? But as I said, when it comes down to just pure money, if, do you know what a fiscal note is?
No,
Okay.
but let's assume maybe not a lot of other people do either.
When bills get introduced, somebody looks at them and says, this looks like it might have a fiscal implication. If it does, they send a memo to the agency that's going to be affected, and they say, here, fill out this form. And the form basically is called a fiscal note. And the agency gets to say how much they think this is going to cost. Okay?
Which is somewhat reasonable until we get to such a high figure. Perhaps we've shifted some of the payment of this from taxes to fees.
Well, in this case, except for some guesswork about how complicated the cases may be, the Office of Administrative Hearings, which is an existing state agency that does stuff all of the time, they're going to hear these cases under the bill. They charge for their judges a certain amount per hour, okay? So they can make a fairly good estimate of how long they think something will cost. But once you put a fiscal note on a bill, then it increases the probability that the bill will be killed, not because it wasn't a good idea, but because of the money. That's the problem with fiscal notes.
And as you said, there was a party line vote then. It triggered that.
Yeah, in the House, it was just weird to me.
I'm going directly to the Capitol.
Oh, good, you got it right.
Perhaps
I'll
too
see
many
you.
people are running for office this year.
I think a lot of people are running away from office this year because of what's coming next year, which is a huge deficit. So now one of the things that I think we have to think about, and in terms of building coalitions, which is part of what MinCOGI is trying to do, the Coalition on Government Information, is finding ways to get money so that folks like you don't have to put $1,000 out of your pocket, and therefore reduce the risk, okay? But the trouble I'm having right now is getting some people in the legislature to understand there are differences between citizens who are media and citizens who are just people. And part of the difference is the money, okay? And part of the difference is the legal advice that they can get to
And
do.
these days, there isn't that big a wall between those two groups.
No, and there shouldn't be. So, but at the moment, we're having some difficulties trying to get people to understand that that wall shouldn't be there if there is a wall. So,
Thanks very much. I think
Sure.
the democracy tax, that startled me when you said that to
Let
me.
me tell you about my experience. I've been an activist for 15, 20 years on a variety of issues, city council issues in Wisconsin. And we have pretty good public records there. We really do have the concept that the records belong to us. We paid for them, they belong to us. And so when somebody suggests that I have to put $1,000 out to demand that the records belong to me, the records that I created belong to me, I consider that a democracy tax. And everybody's for democracy, but now we're saying, but ultimately, even if you prevail, you got to pay $50 for getting that record.
I think what even more important than that is the fact that you worry that you won't prevail and you're out 1,000. And so I think that inhibits so many people from even filing.
Absolutely.
So we say, well, only 30 people applied for that. What are you complaining about? Well, we
Right.
might have seen 3,000, 30,000 say I wanted something otherwise.
So when the government refuses us our records, and then somebody has to go to court, whether we win or lose, we end up paying government's bill. It's our government, right? And if we lose, we have attorney fees just to get our records. So
What are some examples that you fought over in Wisconsin that seem so minor that they should have forked over right away? What did you have to actually go to court over?
well, we didn't go to court, but
You lawyered up.
well, I have been to court on some issues with pro bono attorneys who will spend a little time for me. I've gotten records from Animal Damage Control, now known as Wildlife Services, just to put their records out in a reading room. So, and we had some issues. Developer in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, was taking $16 million of public money, and we wanted to know when he was getting that money and
Maybe some details.
well, it's a very long story to put in just a couple minutes, but we just wanted to know what was the deal with the developer? And what were his records that would assure us that once we laid out $16 million, that we were really going to get some nice waterfront facility?
Openness equals trust. We heard again and again
Yes.
today.
So the city fought us in releasing that. They had every reason, attorney-client privilege and all that kind of stuff, and those records, financial records are private. And finally, some activists went to the city council meeting where this was going to be a closed meeting, and they just sat there. The police chased them out. But then the newspaper did report that, and after that, nobody trusted the folks at City Hall, and nobody trusted the developer, and he went down the tubes. The newspaper actually did get that information, and yes, it looked like he wasn't going to be able to actually put up the building that we lay out $16 million for.
I had too much philosophy in college, to the point where we got really confused there for a while. But we had this example constantly with Walter Strahm, my chairman of my philosophy department. We talked about free will for months and months. And he would say, at the Coke machine of life, Craig, you have Coke and Pepsi, and Coke has benzene in it. Can you make a free will decision when you don't know what's in there? And I think it's really about making a free will decision.
That's right.
Without the information, you're not free, are you?
Yeah. So my answer to a lot of this is put the studies, the documents up on the internet. It's so easy these days. You scan them at the
Every
desk and you
meeting
put them
can
up.
have a camera at it, and even if it's boring, there it
You
is.
put up the records, and some cities are doing some of this. But let's just put it all out there. Then if people complain, you say, well, it's been on the web for 3 months.
Also, too, when people say that they change for the camera, I think, sad to say, it's often for the good. I guess I won't use that word in front of the public because it's forever. And so maybe there's some dampening of that, and maybe that's good. So I
Yeah.
think in meetings, if they're civil, I don't know what the law says.
Yeah.
Do you want to identify yourself, please?
I'm Dr. Ann Frisch, Frisch. I am.
What kind of doctor are you, Frisch?
I have a PhD in human ecology. I was a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh.